Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to Late Night Learning. I am your host, Dr. Anthony Palomba. Now, today we're going to be talking about persuasion as well as communication in organizations. This is a little different than a lot of other things that we've discussed because a lot of what we'll be going through today is the manner in which that we persuade people. How do you convince somebody of an opinion? How do you convince somebody of a particular belief that you might have? We have a lot of different news stories that are cycling. As of this airing right now, we have a lot of news at the border, in fact, in which unfortunately we have a lot of children of illegal immigrants that are being detained in what are being called cages. And we also have a lot of news surrounding movies and a lot of news surrounding the 4th of July and things of that ilk, what people should be doing on the 4th of July. What people should be doing during their summer and how people should be feeling about a particular story in which, unfortunately, children of illegal immigrants are being held in cages. And so all of these stories, all of the things that I've mentioned have to deal with persuasion. It's this notion that we can at least get somebody to consider an opposing viewpoint. Now, with persuasion, it's never about completely changing somebody's belief. In fact, that's kind of difficult to do. What I'd like to focus on in this lesson is how to get somebody to consider an opposing viewpoint. From there, we can get a sense of how they may ingest or reject your particular argument. So let's get started. So, how to be persuasive? What is a counter-argument? Now, persuasion is this notion about changing somebody's belief. Why would I have lawyers here? Lawyers is the first bullet point I have here. Why would I mention lawyers here? Lawyers are paid hundreds of dollars an hour to persuade. In fact, that's the key skill that a lot of attorneys have. They're meant to be persuasive consultants about the law. And granted, they do a lot of other things. But it is super key to note that a lot of attorneys practice persuasion. This is what they are paid for. So the skill set that we're going over today, the act of persuading, is very crucial. Why might it be difficult for us to anticipate a counter-argument, though? If I believe, for instance, that pro-choice is the way to go in this country, pro-choice being giving a woman the control over her body, whether or not to abort a fetus, if the counter-argument deals with being pro-life and being kind of supporting the woman having the child and giving birth to the child, why is it difficult to think about that? Why is it difficult to anticipate the counter-argument when we're trying to erect an argument? Well, it's just for that particular point. The problem is we constantly have issues with anticipating counter-arguments because they're emotional. When we deal with a counter-argument, we're always thinking about, well, I don't want to think about the other side. I don't want to deal with what other people are thinking about because what I'm most worried about is how I feel, my own point of view. So when we're thinking about counter-arguments, you really want to be mindful of, am I also thinking about the counter-argument? And back to our example about attorneys are paid money to anticipate the counter-argument. It's not enough just to hire an attorney to defend you. The goal is that they anticipate arguments from the other side. Our case is that you slipped on a sidewalk. The counter-argument from the other side might be, yes, but there was a sign by the crack in the sidewalk upon which I fell over. My attorney may anticipate that counter-argument from the other side and say, well, wait a minute though, the sign was 10 feet from the crack. How could Anthony possibly see that? And so we can quickly see how anticipating counter-arguments are crucial. The biggest key here as we move through these slides and as you start creating counter-arguments for yourself is removing your emotions. Do not get emotional in orchestrating or creating your own counter-argument. It is important to anticipate counter-arguments when you are giving a speech of persuasion. It makes you seem like you've done your homework. It makes you seem like you're well educated. It makes you seem like you've anticipated and at least acknowledged the other side. If I walk into a room of pro-life people and I am pro-choice, if I can acknowledge some points the other side may make, the other people in the audience may make against me, it's at least a nod and acknowledgement of their own point of view. And as you'll see in this lecture, I never tell people that they're wrong. Let's go to the next slide. Gross. Needless to say, this is probably the ugliest slide I've ever created, and I'm sorry for you, but we'll try to move through this as quickly as possible. If you are engaged in a counter-argument, please do not do any of the following. Do not lose control over emotions. You will look like an idiot or an ape. Do not do it. Hold your own decorum. Do not personally attack the speaker or audience member. Whoever you're engaged with, don't worry about them. Only focus on the idea. Hillary Clinton is not an idiot. Donald Trump is not an idiot. We attack their ideas. That is the way to go about it when you're giving a persuasive speech or trying to be persuasive. Never assume that your viewpoint is completely correct. I don't care how many publications I get in my lifetime. My studies will always have flaws in them. Hopefully not a lot, but there will always be issues with them. There is always an issue with anything that we do when it's in the creative arts. And public speaking and being persuasive is an art. It's not a science. And so bear in mind that you should not be wedded to certain sources. If you get all of your information from the New York Times, from Fox News, chances are it's only one viewpoint. However you may feel about either source, it is important that when you are trying to persuade someone to build up credibility, and we do this by looking up sources and resources. What some of those sources and resources may be, it could be looking up academic journals. It could be looking up prestigious newspapers. I myself, for me, the best source on the planet, The Economist, which makes a lot of people groan because the articles are usually 3 to 4 pages long. But they're super in-depth, they're very rich, and they're very well articulated. And so these are some of the things you want to start thinking about as you become a persuasive speaker. And really think about persuasion as a type of communication and the theories that kind of back persuasion. Let's move along. So presenting the counter argument, this is crucial when you're going through persuasion. And so when we're presenting the counter argument, we want to think about how to introduce counter arguments, what people may believe who might oppose a particular argument. So you can say many people believe, argue that, or you can say it's often thought, imagined, supposed, or you can say but it isn't true that, or you can say on the other hand. With all of these stems that begin the persuasive speech, or at least the counter argument segment of the speech, I'm not saying anyone is wrong. Let's keep going. So let's put it all together with kind of a template that I've put together to kind of demonstrate what I'm talking about here. So this is a sample of a persuasive speech. So Korean parents devote considerable resources to ensuring that their children will learn English, grammar, and punctuation, right? We know this. The United States is very fortunate to have a lot of immigrants from Korea who are super talented, super smart, and come over here to study at our colleges and universities, and even earlier than that. Fine. However, Korean parents should rethink this, as this strong push for learning English may negatively impact their children's abilities to learn English meaningfully, diminish their motivation, and reduce their self-esteem. You can quickly see my arguments. I, in this case, am opposed to Korean parents forcing their children to learn English for those reasons. Let's move along. So when you're thinking about cutting up a speech and making sure that you address the counter-argument, and then you have your rebuttal, which we'll go over in a second, this is one of two styles that you can use here. So this style, you introduce a counter-argument, and then you introduce a rebuttal. A rebuttal is your response to the counter-argument. So you can think of it as this. I have an argument. I might have a few paragraphs for that argument. Then I introduce the counter-argument, what people opposing me may believe, and then I have a rebuttal, a response. And so here, for the first counter argument, in red, some might claim that this kind of focus on studying English will enable students to succeed in college and in their careers. Now here, I'm acknowledging that there's a counter argument. Have I said no here at all? I have not disclaimed or derided or derailed. I have not done anything here to undermine this argument. I have not said no. I have not said they are wrong. Look what I do here instead for a rebuttal. However, the focus on rote learning or memorizing English grammar and punctuation still may leave students very poorly prepared for the demands of college and careers. And so what you can see there, and you can keep reading it by simply pausing this, you can see what I've done in that paragraph, the first one, and as well as in the second one. The idea is that you introduce a counter argument and then you give a rebuttal. You will come across more intelligent, more relaxed, more put together, and you'll be more confident if you properly anticipate even two counter arguments when you're trying to persuade someone, whether it's going on the subway instead of taking a car, going to the beach instead of camping, going to see a Yankee game rather than a Mets game, whatever it is you're trying to persuade people. By using this system, it will aid you in making really, really cogent arguments. Let's move along. So with persuasion, it's not enough just to kind of talk about how to do it. This, of course, is a lecture on theory and theory that supports persuasion. How do we get to the point in which counter-arguments, rebuttals, work on people? Well, cognitive dissonance theory is one theory that really highlights the way in which we marshal information. Sometimes we digest certain kinds of information, and sometimes we're not into it. So cognitive dissonance theory reflects how thoughts, emotions, and behaviors are affected by social interaction, how people manage inconsistencies between their beliefs and their behaviors. We're managers, after all, of the information that we receive. Not everything that we hear we embrace. Some of us are interested in being New York Giants fans. Some of us are interested in being San Francisco 49ers fans. Some of us are interested in living by the ocean. Some of us aren't. We are constantly making decisions based on information that we have, and we make judgments. CDT assigns a central role to cognition and assumes that people's actions are determined by their thoughts. People hold certain beliefs about what's true, what's false, good, bad, right, and wrong, but we notice inconsistencies between our actions and beliefs. When was the last time you brought a piece of information to one of your parents that discredited a claim that they had? How did your parents respond? Did they acquiesce and say, oh, you know what, Jamal? You know what, Becca? You're right. I was wrong. Or do they kind of bear down and just stuff their ankles into the sand and grit and say, no, there's no way that I'm wrong? People don't like to yield to the fact or idea that they're wrong. It is not something we like to embrace. Recognition of inconsistency between actions and belief causes cognitive dissonance. We don't like information that goes against what we believe. Don't tell me if I am a pro-lifer, for instance, and I believe that children should be born and should not be aborted. Don't tell me that implementing abortion can lead to a drop in crime, which has been found. That is something that would go against exactly what I believe as a pro-lifer. And it would force me to change or at least challenge my beliefs, which I have no interest in doing as a human being. Let's move along. So some of the concepts here. First and foremost, perceived importance is the importance of the issue. So when we are met with something, when we're met with an idea, the first thing we have to think about is this really important to me? As a Caucasian male, abortion may or may not really be that important to me. If I was a female, perhaps. If I worked at Planned Parenthood, perhaps. So that's kind of the first bracket here. And when we're talking to our friends and family, when you're trying to persuade them of something, you really should be cognizant of, do they really even care? Do they really even care that I'm bringing up what's going on at the border, or what's going on with climate change, or what's going on with the rising level of oceans? Does any of it matter? Are they really that interested? Bear this in mind before you engage someone in some sort of persuasive speech or debate for that matter. Dissonance ratio. This is the comparison of how many of the person's beliefs are consistent with versus inconsistent with his or her behavior. I've brought up facts to people who do not want to listen to them, who may deny climate change or who may deny a whole host of other things. And so the dissonance ratio may be severe for some people who may kind of put up a conceptual shield and say, yeah, I'm not buying this. I really don't want to expose myself to this. I will wind up being vulnerable. Not interested. So then we have selective exposure. I, as a liberal, may not be interested in exposing myself to Fox News or other conservative media. I, as a conservative, really could care less about NBC News. I will not expose myself to that stuff. We can quickly see how this theory really explains the fractures and fissures in our own mass news consumption in this country right now. There's also selective attention. We are selective in what we pay attention to. And then finally, selective interpretation. People will make sense out of ambiguous information. And so some people might say, yeah, with that tweet that Donald Trump sent out, I don't really think it was against immigrants. No, it was totally against illegal immigrants. Everybody can have their own selective interpretation about something. This is almost like looking at a piece of art and having 10 people make 10 conclusions about the same darn picture that just has an orange tree in it by the beach. Some people might say that it's romantic. Some people might say it's just a tree by the beach. People will come up with their own conclusions when they look at something. These are stellar pillars to understand when you're delving into how to be persuasive and how to be effectively persuasive. Knowing your audience and understanding all of these elements that I've laid out will aid you to be a more effective persuasive speaker. Let's move along. Elaboration likelihood model. So it's not enough just to try to persuade someone or to even understand cognitive dissonance. Elaboration likelihood is kind of getting at the information that we digest, whether it's active or not active, whether we're really engaged or we're not engaged. So elaboration likelihood model assumes that regularities manifest in human behavior. We have patterns to which we regulate and digest information. It assumes that people want to hold correct attitudes. My attitude is correct. Of course we should spend more money to save the environment. My attitude is correct. Of course we should spend more money to protect this country. Persuasive messages change or reinforce attitudes by impacting our thoughts. Messages are persuasive if they create favorable thoughts. Great, I just found this article that demonstrates that if we spend $100 million more on missiles, our country will be 15% more safer. Great, I love this message. It supports what I think. It supports what I obviously already know. It works for me. It is in line with how I feel, and it further reinforces my own opinion. People's motivation and capability to process information varies all the time. Sometimes we're passive, and sometimes we're active. It depends what kind of climate that we're in. If we're watching a commercial, we're probably laid back on a couch saying to ourselves, yeah, this commercial's kind of cool. There's a dog who catches a frisbee, and then the commercial is trying to persuade me to drink beer. I guess that's pretty cool, right? We really don't think about commercials much more than that. So this model itself considers the likelihood of participant elaboration over an idea. High elaboration engenders structural thinking based on data and logical reasoning. So if I'm elaborating highly on a commercial, I'm thinking, this new sandwich from Subway, it has avocado in it. An avocado can lead to a decrease in cholesterol. And, they're also using organic meats and they're using organic breads. Wow, this is really impactful. This is really useful. I can get into this. And so when we're thinking at that level, that's pretty huge. Differently, when we're thinking at a low level, the information is not really considered carefully and thoughtfully. And so if it's a Kim Kardashian, or if it's a Britney Spears, or if it's somebody else who really shouldn't have the amount of celebrity that they probably have, we're probably not elaborating highly on the commercial, whatever they're pushing. Maybe it's a perfume, maybe it's a new car, or maybe it's, I don't know, anything like that. So for those kinds of commercials that really push celebrity, there's really no data, there's really no information, they're not really highlighting the project or product attributes. We're digesting it at a low elaboration level. Now, what does that mean? We'll see in the next slide. Let's go to the next slide. So participants who are highly elaborate, who are highly elaborating on something, some piece of information, we carefully examine the information, analysis of arguments, consider other relevant details. But if it's low, we don't go through the central route. We go the peripheral route. This means that they don't, or we don't, scrutinize the argument or evidence. We may consider less factors, less relevant factors. And so we see this with a lot of advertisements that we have. We see that if it's a commercial about dog food and they're mentioning 10 or 12 or 15 different ingredients, great. I love salmon, I love fish, I love turkey, or all of these other things. By the way, if you watch a pet food commercial, it's not for the pets, it's for the owners. Your pet does not care about salmon. It certainly doesn't care about smoked salmon. Your pet just wants to be fed. Those commercials are absolutely for the owners, just by the by. They're really advertising for you. But don't try Fancy Feast. That being said, with this then, we elaborate and process on information very differently. A low elaboration, as I've said earlier, if we're watching a commercial and it's with Leo DiCaprio, or if it's with some sort of celebrity who's hot, who's sexy, who looks good, they're standing next to perfume, is there really anything there to really elaborate on? I mean, probably not. She's hot, he's really hot, I'd go on a date with her. Yeah, that beer looks pretty good too, maybe I'll try it. It really is that rudimentary and that simple. And so for a lot of commercials that we watch, and Old Spice is also another brand that does a really good job of just heightening absurd humor to use that as a way to push the product. If you watch an Old Spice commercial, for instance, you'll see that there really there's no information about the product itself. It's just how ridiculous it is, how funny it is, and you're probably processing a lot of it on a low elaboration model. You're going through a peripheral route. Yeah, I'm not really thinking too in depth about Old Spice deodorant, but that dude's pretty funny. He just turned into a horse. Maybe I'll try it. So a lot of advertisers will push their products and services in this manner because consumers are persuaded by less relevant factors. We're not looking at ingredients. We're not looking at if it's effective or not. Instead, we're kind of looking at fantasy, humor, a whole host of other tools and trips and tricks that are used to push product. Let's move on to the next slide. Inoculation theory. Who here likes needles? So I'm not going to inject anyone, not that kind of doctor. How people may maintain their attitudes and beliefs against persuasive arguments. Inoculation theory gets into this. And so people can protest their attitudes and beliefs against counter arguments, right? We can be really for a particular argument or particular cause. People are able to defend their attitudes if they feel threatened. It is possible to enhance one's resistance to counter arguments. It's the summer right now as of the airing of this program, but in 3 months, everybody's going to go for flu shots, or so we hope. According to inoculation theory, the process of inoculating people against persuasive attempts begins with a threat. And so if you can anticipate someone or an opposing figure, or perhaps I'm a politician and I am going up against someone who is for a quicker path for immigrants to achieve citizenship, let's say, and I know we're about to debate, I might say to my people, well, if you go for this candidate, we're going to have way more immigrants in the country. They're going to wind up taking jobs. Remember that we've had fewer and fewer jobs in this country because we've had an outpouring of immigrants. They're taking jobs from American teens. If I start this narrative, I'm inoculating people. I'm trying to prevent people from digesting other arguments. I am beating everybody else to the punch as best as I can. If this is an election, if this is a debate, if this is whatever, I am inoculating people by providing essentially rebuttals before a counter argument is even thrown at me. I'm already giving threats. I'm already giving responses. I'm already trying to inoculate you so that you have a conceptual resistance to particular ideas. I know what you're thinking. I know what you're thinking, but it's this, but it's that. When you're able to do that, when you're able to give that kind of argument with people and to be the first to the punch, that pretty much provides people a baseline. If I have a group of people that are not familiar with the United States environment, that are not familiar with global environment, I can very quickly talk to them about climate change. I can very quickly talk to them about the rising sea levels. I can very quickly talk to them about a lot of these things, so that if they come into contact with other people that possess a different viewpoint, that are skeptical of climate change, that are skeptical of accusations that sea levels are rising, I've inoculated them. They're protected. Let's move along. So, as I've said, people can be inoculated against messages. We are better than this. So, protests are always around DC, especially now these days. But the refutation of same messages and different messages are a key component of inoculation theory here. So, refutational of same messages, or the refutation of same messages, messages present and then refute the same arguments for which they are trying to increase resistance. And so messages may present an argument and then refute it. Obviously, we've gone through this before earlier in this lecture. They also may refute different messages, present arguments that are different from those that are attempting to build up resistance. And so there are different ways in which we can articulate and create arguments. And the key here is, with persuasion, is that you want to be mindful of who you're targeting. And I hate to use the word targeting, but in essence, that's what we do when we're trying to persuade. At the very least, we're trying to persuade someone to take a chance on a belief that we have, or to consider a counter argument, or to be prepared for a rebuttal if we are anticipating counter arguments from the other side. We're not always thrilled with the information that we receive, but I beg all of you, please fight your own individual cognitive dissonances deep within inside you. Be open to all information, be open to all viewpoints. It will strengthen your arguments, and it'll strengthen your own security as a person with beliefs and with arguments. So let's take a look at the next slide. Now, you might be saying to yourself, does it really work to try to give people seemingly preventative information surrounding some sort of topic so that they don't get inoculated with other messages? It actually has been found to be powerful. It's been found to be successful in protecting people from allowing the ban of animal testing, supporting U.S. involvement in the Iraq War, and even opposing challenges to condom use. And so firms, advertisers, public relations people, when they grab hold of an issue, they try to inform people about an issue before it kind of reaches a critical mass, or before a counter-argument is laid out. So if you can be the first in the market to try to give someone information, it does provide a conceptual baseline. Targeting beliefs or attitudes must be placed before inoculation. So it's a preventative strategy. That's kind of the way to think about inoculation theory. Perceived involvement here involves the effectiveness of inoculation messages. If messages are effective, if the inoculation messages are effective, you will have some sort of perceived involvement then from people who are receiving these messages. And that's kind of critical to note, right? I used to be a grad student at Syracuse University. There used to be anti-abortion or pro-lifers who would protest pro-choice and would protest Planned Parenthood. They had pictures of fetuses that were aborted. I mean, it was very graphic, but talk about a way in which to deliver effective messages to kind of inoculate young students who probably still hadn't made up their mind about where they fell in the issue. It's definitely an instance of inoculation theory. Well, that's all the time we have on Late Night Learning. As always, keep laughing and keep learning.